In this video series, we're going to talk about how to write impact letters and the different types of impact letters that, with your therapist, you might decide to write to your son or daughter. Let me first introduce the team.
Hi, I'm Maddie Liebing, and I'm the clinical director. I'm a psychologist and marriage and family therapist and work with both programs.
Hey, I'm Rachel. I'm a primary therapist for the Juniper Canyon program.
Hello, I'm Ronnie. I'm a primary therapist for Juniper Canyon as well.
Hi, I'm Steve Kern. I'm a therapist with Legacy. I am a licensed clinical social worker.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm a substance use counselor. I'm the infield therapist for Legacy, and I do some work for Juniper Canyon as well.
I'm Jake. I'm also a substance use counselor, and I'm a primary therapist at Legacy.
Devin Nanton, primary therapist and substance use counselor over at Legacy Outdoor Adventures.
Hi, I'm David Weeder. I'm a primary therapist at Legacy. I am a clinical mental health counselor.
And I am Troy Faddis. I am a clinical supervisor for both programs at Legacy Outdoor Adventures and Juniper Canyon. And I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Welcome to our video about impact letters. So let's talk about the 4 types of impact letters, or the 4 styles of impact letters. Because impact letters have a long history in treatment programs, particularly in wilderness therapy settings. And over time, they've changed and had variety and have probably improved, but it also is an individualized treatment intervention. It's one of those things that we use to meet the client where the client is at, which is why it's still important for us to understand the different types of impact letters that you might want to write and how to write each one and how to determine with your therapist which one it is that you should be writing. Second style, continuing on the continuum of the stages of change, or using motivational interviewing as a model for this next style. We usually do this one a little bit later. It's not as early. We have more time in that we're trying to let the program help them through pre-contemplation, and your letter is not necessarily the tool that we're using to move them. We're waiting until they're naturally or organically already in the contemplation stage. And so there's a lot less of, let's try to realign all of your cognitive distortions. Let's try to, we're not trying to do a laundry list of calling them out. This letter is very different. This is a letter where we're making some assumptions. I know it's hard because you haven't seen them yet or talked to them yet, except through letters and through our eyes as the therapist. But knowing that they're moving along, seeing them walking next to you, and this letter is much more of, let's talk about and identify the problems that are going on together as a team. So it's not a gotcha, and it's not falling into old patterns. It really is, can we together talk about what we see, what needs to be worked on, and what are some opportunities and paths that we can take that's going to help us get to where we want to be.
I typically do impact letters around week 3 or week 4. And what I'm looking for before I decide to have the client read them with their group is that they have already decided to stay in the program. They've made a commitment to being here. And then the way that I structure them maybe best fits this style of impact letter. What I've started asking parents to do is essentially write a biography of the client. Got a heavier focus on problem areas than other areas, but it is, what is your story of your child's life?
And in that process, you can see some problem identification and patterns that arise in their way of operating and the interaction between them and their parents, right?
Yeah, it's if we compare to maybe the first style, this sense that the client is refusing to see something, I think what I find with a lot of my clients is that they're unable to see something. They simply don't have the insight. They aren't necessarily aware of what's going on. They're sort of walking around with blinders, and they have no idea what they're doing or why they're doing it. And the same thing can be true for parents to some extent. They might be hyper-focused on particular problem areas and not really have a good sense of why these things are happening, where other things are problems, what are the underlying pieces. So I think for every everyone in the process, they get to create insight.
Well, and I think the peer group is really important in this one because, again, the parents are naming behaviors and things that they see, and then the peer group gets to reflect back, hey, we're seeing this show up here, right? And we can hold you accountable here to these same behaviors and these same patterns that are showing up in the group environment.
And typically, do you read these letters in front of the group without the client having seen the letters before?
100% of the time. The emotional experience is so important of the reading in itself in that moment in the group. I don't know if this fits into the models or maybe it goes across all the different models, but one of the primary reasons I think we do impact letters is because it's shame work. We're helping them deal with things that they're ashamed of through being vulnerable. I find that very rarely a client does not know what's going to be in the impact letter. They're almost never surprised to hear any of the things that are in there. It was their life, so they know the things that happened. They maybe weren't thinking about them or considering them in the same way that they are once they get the impact letter, but they know what's in there and they know what they're going to be ashamed of. So helping them get to a place where they can start to talk about it and release some of it. It's usually, there's a lot of fear going into impact letters on clients' parts. They're scared of the experience of reading them, of the emotion that's going to come up. There's a lot of fear for parents when they think about their kid reading them. It's going to be painful. But what I find is there's usually a sense of relief and a release of shame through that process itself. And I think that's why it's so important to have that impact letter group, not just for the letter to be read by the client themselves.
Yeah, I just want to put in here too, I think with women, I agree with what David's saying. And I think there are a few cases where they're so embedded in their shame that this cannot be a productive tool because they're not allowing that to release, right? What David's saying is a lot of our clients, and I agree with this for our women as well, is like sometimes it is that relief. And there are some clients, and I think this revolves around a lot of trauma, sexual trauma especially, where behaviors have stemmed from specific sexual trauma. And so when we go there, it's such a delicate situation. It feels pretty complex that sometimes I know we do have the clients read a letter or something before and then come to the group, with the group being the end goal because it's so important for the community to actually hold them accountable and comfort them. But I just wanted to name that there are a few people that I think they won't be able in that moment where they're at in their process and their recovery to actually release shame.
And I support that. It is typically trauma / sexual trauma, and where they're already so hard on themselves that it actually is, like you said, David, it's kind of a relief to see it's not as bad as they thought it was going to be. But sometimes by having them, process it in a therapy session and then read it in group, puts them in a place to be able to receive the support that the group's going to give them around some of the things that have happened to them in their life as well. But it's not, I think you have to just really get a feel for your client and what's going to be the most productive. Because there have been times, I know, Sam, you can maybe talk to this, when we've done just the regular impact letter and it actually was a deterrent to progress with a particular client that I can remember you mentioned.
Yes, I kind of, in that scenario, the parents had used their emotions and love as like a very distinct boundary. And I felt like it really inhibited his growth towards the future, like seeing the stages of change style. It left him stuck and not knowing how to behave in order to please other people. And he was not particularly thinking of himself. And I also think during, seeing the stages of change is like the continuum. And in this type of impact letter, very frequently, we underestimate the power of the vulnerability of seeing their strengths. Many of our clients are really stuck in a very low self-esteem and self-worth place, and reading in front of their peers what the parents see as some of their strengths, some of the baseline that they can grow upon, can be a really powerful experience, because so frequently we pay so much attention to their struggles and what they are working on, to give them that solid foundation of like, this is what I can see that you can start to change your life, or how this is your type of traits that will be able to help change your life going forward.
As a therapist, also their self-esteem, because I think that's something that's really important, to bring these letters forward when their self-esteem is still really low. I don't think is the best thing, and it can be push them down, their guilt and shame. What I'm looking for as a therapist is them being at that point, and that's what our program naturally does. It helps these guys get to a point where their self-esteem is rising, just because they're doing the things that they should be doing in their life. They're living by their values, things like that. And then bringing those impact letters in, they have enough self-esteem at that point to be able to manage the guilt and shame. And then the guilt and shame, that is produced, can move them forward instead of pushing them down. So that's really what I look for about when to bring those letters into the guy's program. And to me, I have to really know my client well and have a good rapport with them, so that I can actually understand when it's the best time to introduce those letters.
Absolutely.
I will say too, I don't. Not everything goes in an impact letter. I will have parents edit things out, things that are extremely sensitive. You're talking about some of the details of trauma or behaviors related to trauma. I think for many clients, almost everything in an impact letter is going to be embarrassing or full of shame on some level. But we do want to make a call on what is not appropriate to share in the group, what we're going to process in session, what needs that sensitivity, what the peers might not really be able to handle, which is a possibility as well. So there are a lot of common things that end up in impact letters that are generally easier to talk about and for peers to work with, and there are things that aren't really appropriate.